The entire global economy relies on a singular physical reality: thousands of massive steel vessels moving across the ocean. This data visualization tracks the density of shipping lanes terminating at Indian ports. The concentrated lines represent a heavy reliance. 95% of India's total trade by volume and up to 90% of its crude oil arrives by sea. All of that volume, millions of tons of fuel, food, and industrial components, must squeeze through a few narrow, highly concentrated geographic pathways. For India, economic survival is dictated by two specific bottlenecks: the Red Sea to the west and the Strait of Hormuz to the northwest. When localized geopolitical conflicts erupt at these choke points, the physical flow of goods stops. That physical blockage immediately triggers a financial cascade, forcing the state into drastic economic interventions. India's geography now functions as its primary systemic risk to domestic macroeconomic stability. In late 2023, militant attacks by Houthi rebels in the Red Sea shattered the baseline assumption of safe passage for commercial shipping. The disruption struck the core of India's trade network. Historically, this specific corridor processes nearly half of all Indian exports and a third of its imports. This map illustrates the logistical reaction. The red line shows the traditional Suez route, abandoned en masse. Instead, vessels trace the yellow line via the Cape of Good Hope, adding 3,000 miles. This physical distance creates a time penalty, ballooning a 34-day transit to 43 days. For agricultural exporters, that extra time is destructive. Shipments of perishable goods, like Indian grapes, suffer severe quality degradation sitting in extended transit. The industrial sector faces parallel friction. Extended transit times generate massive order backlogs, driving up logistics expenses for automotive and manufacturing firms waiting on delayed components. Physical disruptions at these choke points break the highly calibrated, just-in-time supply chain models that dictate modern industrial production. The Red Sea presents a general trade shock, but the Strait of Hormuz is an acute threat. This narrow waterway processes 20% of global petroleum. During the 2026 conflict escalation, the sudden closure of Hormuz triggered nationwide energy lockdown fears, exposing a severe asymmetry in India's strategic reserves. This chart measures India's energy buffers. The large column is the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, holding 60 days of crude oil. However, the second column reveals a vulnerability. Domestic LPG reserves cover only 5 days of demand, mostly imported through the Strait of Hormuz. When Hormuz traffic halted, the impact hit households immediately. LPG cylinder deliveries faced massive delays, and industrial gas was rationed to prioritize domestic cooking fuel. Indian energy shipments were eventually diverted onto highly inefficient, expensive alternative routes across the Atlantic and around the Cape of Good Hope. An energy choke point disruption immediately threatens the daily survival of the population. Burning extra fuel during a 3,000-mile detour accounts for only a fraction of the total economic damage during a supply shock. The true cost is dictated by a hidden financial variable: the war risk insurance premium. When an area is declared a high-risk zone, premiums explode, leaping from a baseline of 0.02% of a vessel's total value up to a staggering 7.5%. This graph of the Baltic Dry Index illustrates exactly how violently global shipping benchmarks react during periods of prolonged disruption. This exponential rise in voyage costs destroys the profit margins of low-margin, high-volume exports. Consider India's annual export of 4.5 million tons of basmati rice. Inflated shipping and insurance costs make these commodities too expensive for the global market. Those compounded logistical penalties do not disappear. They flow backward into the domestic economy, driving up the wholesale price index and sparking widespread inflation. Modern geopolitical warfare operates on balance sheets. Triggering the mathematics of risk premiums is sufficient to destabilize a domestic economy. At a certain threshold, the free market simply breaks. Global marine insurance providers refuse to underwrite unpredictable systemic war risks at any affordable rate. Faced with paralyzed trade routes, the Indian government executed an extreme macroeconomic countermeasure, stepping in to act as the underwriter of last resort. Authorities launched the 12,980 crore rupee Bharat Maritime insurance pool. This sovereign pool guarantees hull, machinery, and cargo coverage specifically for Indian-linked vessels, bypassing the exorbitant rates demanded by global P&I clubs. By pooling risk domestically, the state smooths out extreme price swings. Exporters regain the ability to price their goods predictably and maintain their international contracts. This intervention served as a necessary macroeconomic shield, designed specifically to prevent the collapse of Indian import and export margins under geopolitical pressure. Absorbing this risk carries immense fiscal danger. If multiple ships are damaged or lost to conflict, the sovereign balance sheet must absorb a catastrophic financial blow. Furthermore, financial engineering cannot fix physical geography. Long-term survival requires constructing physical redundancies, like the proposed India-Middle East-Europe economic corridor, to bypass these maritime choke points entirely. The era of hyper-efficient, corporate, just-in-time supply chains has concluded. It is being replaced by a system prioritizing strategic redundancy and sovereign-backed resilience. In a globalized economy defined by weaponized choke points, a nation's economic survival relies entirely on its government's capacity to absorb the risks the private market abandons.